So the Russians had already said that our demands will only grow from here on. So if you don't take the deal, it will be worse tomorrow. It's a good incentive to make the opponent take the deal today if they know that this is the case. Anyways, what I was going to was that Sergei Lavrov, he had an interview on January 14, in which he said that we have to have a serious discussion about the future of the population in Crimea and Novorossiya. So Novorossiya would also include a much wider region. That would be Kharkov, Dnipro, Petrovsk, Nikolaev, and of course Odessa. This is
Chernigov also.
yes.
Poltava.
So you're having now possible. Some would interpret this as an indicator of Russia's growing demand. Again, it didn't say this has to come under the Russian Federation. It could just mean that you have to restore some of the human rights or minority rights for Russian speakers, to have religious rights, let them access the Orthodox Church, cultural rights, and be allowed to. Yeah, but how are you seeing this? Do you see Russia preparing to, I guess, change the deal on the table?
Well, yeah, I think it is, especially after Trump's last moves. That I think, Vladimir Vladimirovich hasn't been seen that much. He popped up yesterday again, and a few other cases, but he hasn't been seen that much. And when Putin goes silent for an extended period of time, in this case, partially it was the holidays, and partially I think there's a lot of strategizing right now on how we approach it. And this all started with Trump's attempted, in my view, absolutely in my view, and not only in my view, attempted assassination of Putin. Because if we noticed what we had before the talks, right before Zelensky arrived, Trump had to talk with Putin on the phone. And sometime around right that time, that order had to have been given to launch those drones. Because after all, those drones are not sitting that close to Valdai. Valdai is in Novgorod Oblast, which is northwest of Moscow. So that's a decently long flight. That's about an hour and a half flight at least for those drones. So I think that they were planning, if it was a success, they'd have a nice little conference and announcement between Trump and Zelensky. Mission solved. War is over. We've killed Putin. Ha ha ha. Which would have been probably followed by DEFCON 5 from the Russian side. If Medvedev came in or somebody else like that. But they don't think that far through, as we see in Venezuela. As Trump's plan in Venezuela, we grab Maduro and then everything is ours. Well, and then the next day, now what do? Okay, now we start planning, the stuff that you're supposed to do before you embark on your new adventure. And I think America, between figuring out what to do with Venezuela, figuring out Greenland, figuring out if they're going to start a new war with Iran, because, by the way, those protests are over in Iran, partially because Iran and Russia are very close now in military terms, and Russia brought in equipment that just shut down Musk's Starlink, which was being used by these various Western-backed factions to cause the problems that they were causing and the murders that they were committing. And that all shut down real quick. So now Trump's down to, well, there's not going to be a popular revolution in Iran. What do we do? And there's aircraft, there's at least one, maybe two aircraft battle groups that are steaming toward the Persian Gulf. They won't enter the Persian Gulf, that's suicide, but they're steaming there. So what do we do next? War with Iran? Well, if Israel enters that war with Iran and goes nuclear, Iran will destroy Israel by wiping out, I think it's the Nagiz nuclear power station in the middle of Israel. They'll take it off and there'll be a nuclear meltdown. And then that area isn't going to be inhabitable either. It's a mutual assured destruction, whether Israel realizes it or not. I think they do. But either way, Trump's attention is going very far away from, and we're not even talking about China and everything else. And they're continuing to try to push India into a war with China that the Indians aren't too interested in. So who knows what new things Trump will come up with, because that last Pakistani Indian flare up had American fingerprints all over the Pakistani side, and it definitely wasn't from the Chinese side pushing the Pakistanis into it. So I don't know. But either way, all of that deserves attention because, by the way, Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, and Nicaragua apparently are all on Trump's hit list, as he's mentioned and as Rubio's mentioned. It looks like they're planning on something to try another Bay of Pigs in Cuba. I mean, they're all over the place. And everybody, we're talking, not even talking about Greenland and Iceland and ice inside of the U.S., causing all kinds of issues. That we could do a separate program just on that. I spent 4 hours going through all these videos on what ice is doing, and they are totally out of control. And I think they're controllably out of control to cause an insurrection type situation, and then the declaration of emergency powers. But that's a whole separate issue. So, but all of that's pulling Trump's attention. So whatever Russia's new demands, they're not going to pay a lot of attention to that. Trump's busy. He's busy building his internal and external empire. I mean, in the flat open, we've taken the velvet gloves off the steel gauntlets type of empire. So the Europeans are going to be stuck. What are they going to do? Russia makes new demands. They have one of two options: back the hell off and consent to them, or escalate. Escalate means war. Companies like Rheinmetall then get an Oreshnik welcome gift. You know, do you want to go to war? That's the question that comes down. And every nation in the EU/NATO is going to have to answer that question. I think half of them are going to go, no, thanks, we're out. We're sitting this out. Tap out. And the Northern Europeans, and the Scandinavians, they seem to be, and the Poles in this case, seem to be very hell bent on war. Though I think the French are starting to waver. Go figure. They're all over the place, anyways. So who knows what tomorrow is? with the quality of coke that Macron gets.
This is a great irony of trying to keep the war going, because as long as the war keeps on going, the Europeans will be excessively dependent on the United States to come to our rescue if something goes really bad. But as we grow this huge dependence on the United States, the US can see this and they can cash in on it, as we see with Greenland. If it wasn't, if we weren't in this, it's not even a proxy war anymore. It's more a direct war with the Russians. If this wasn't happening, the Europeans could afford to take a bit harder line and actually stand up for their own interest. But it's very difficult to do now. So this objective of keeping a war going, which then makes the Europeans so dependent, which allows them to be extorted in this way, it's quite amazing to watch, especially when they're increasingly also recognizing that they can't win this thing anyways. So it is it's flabbergasting how we're actually here. But and of course, that's just looking at the Europeans. I mean, you would think that over time it would be in everyone's interest to have a stable, functioning Ukraine as well, as a bit of a buffer between Russia and the rest of the Europeans. But if this keeps on going, it might not even survive as a nation. Definitely without a coastline.
Look, first of all, what are the Germans going to say against the Americans? When the Americans say, oh, really? Off button on the LNG. All the tankers just turned around. Bye-bye. That's it. Now what do the Germans do? They don't have LNG. They don't have gas from Russia. Norway does not produce enough gas to feed all of Europe. No matter how hard Norway can try, it can't. The U.S. really can't even feed all of Europe in gas. But there's no alternatives. Now what? And that goes for much of Europe. So right there, they're already stuck. They've got their freedom molecules stuck in their throat. Well, what do? You've burned down all the bridges, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely dependent on the U.S. European suppliers simply cannot meet that demand level. Russia just blew up part of the Oreshnik strike was on the gas on the gas storage facilities that also had European gas in there. I guess they figured that if our gas is in there too, they won't dare strike. Well, they struck. So, and you're right. What do you do now? You're screwed, because even if you want to go to war, how do you build the equipment? I mean, I guess you could go back to coal, but that takes a little bit of time too. How do Merz finally came out and said, oh, blowing up all of our nuclear power plants was probably a bad idea, demolishing them. Really? Wow, that's great. Close the barn door after the horses are gone and the barn's burned down. That makes a lot of sense. But that's what you're facing at right now. So what do the Europeans do? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the U.S. will sell weapons if the Europeans give up all their gold, silver, virgins. I don't know what else they're gonna give up. There's not much more past that. The crown jewels. Maybe they'll get you a couple more tanks. But that's the reality we're looking at. Yeah, Europe is absolutely screwed. Non-Russian Europe, and particularly in the non-Austro-Hungarian Europe, which seems to at least have come to its senses. Everything else in Europe is screwed.
I think you might be underestimating our armies. I heard that the British were able to get one guy to Greenland, and the Norwegians, we put together a team of 2 soldiers. So
That's a fire team, baby. I think the Americans will drive by here, have an MRE so you don't starve to death as they keep going. Europe, by the way, doesn't have logistics. Interestingly enough, the majority, particularly almost all the seaborne logistics, is U.S. ran. And I'll take that even further with this little short story, just to understand even what the American logistics is at. So I was a project manager in preparing an exercise. I was a captain at this point, to exercise of, we were deploying prior to Iraq too. We're deploying an aviation unit from Tennessee down to Fort Jackson, Florida, loading them up on ships. I was in charge of all this, bringing them into Henderson, Texas. Henderson, I think it was called. Unloading them there, and then they proceed on to Fort Polk, Louisiana, for train up prior to Iraq. Well, I get to Fort Jackson, Florida, because I'm doing a recon. Brian and a bunch of the people that are different units, representatives, are supposed to be supporting all this. And I'm walking down the pier, the military part of Fort Jackson port, and I'm walking down. This is, by the way, this is 2000. This is 2002. And I'm walking down the pier with a major who's in charge of this pier, and they're loading U.S. Marine Corps heavy equipment onto a ship, onto a transport ship. It's tanks in this case, the M1 tanks. And the interesting part is the flag that ship was flying was a Russian flag. And I'm sitting there looking, and it's like, okay, what am I missing here, sir? Like, oh, you don't understand, Captain. We don't have a merchant marine. Our merchant marine hasn't built any new ships since the 1950s, and they're all in dry dock waiting to be cut up for scrap metal up in New York or somewhere around there area. We float everything on private transport ships. In this case, at that point, it was Norwegian, Greek, and Russian ships that were primarily used. So even the U.S. has big issues, but I mean, they can nationalize transport ships, but they are still the backbone of the logistics, the naval logistics for all of NATO. So yeah, outside of dropping those 3 poor suckers in, here's some food and some money to buy some more food and some ammo. You're screwed. I mean, what can you do? You're stuck in New Zealand waiting for it to be either liberated by the Yanks or to be oppressed by Mordor that's going to come from Russia and China, and the lightning and the storm clouds, just like that meme that came out from the White House. So yeah, that's the situation. So, but one side note, sorry to interrupt. One side note, there's been an interesting development the other day. Yes, who just re-registered their logos in Russia?
whom?
Mercedes-Benz.
Really?
And I think they want their factory back. Out of only about 30% of the foreign companies ever left. Mostly they were Germans. They went lockstep as they were told. The Americans and the rest either didn't leave or just changed the name and made a subsidiary and stayed. But the Germans all left. So yeah, Mercedes-Benz is re-registering, and it seems to be wanting back into the market.
Well, given that they can't compete that well anymore, it seems foolish to cut yourself off such a huge market. But
well, if they build in Russia, they get the cheap energy.
Oh yeah, that's
the
a good
cheap
point.
metal.
Yeah, because a lot of the German companies, they actually follow the Russian energy. That is, when the energy went to China, a lot of the German companies packed up. They went to China and built there instead. So it's this idea that politicians can control everything. It's some things are beyond their control, and actually that was a point I was going to get to with this. The sending 1 or 2 soldiers here and there. I spoke to them on this channel actually with the former director for Russia analysis at the CIA, George Beebe, and he was making the point. This is almost a year ago that the main weakness of the Europeans was that there was no strategy. That is, strategy, you outline clearly what you want to achieve, but also how you achieve it. How do you obtain the resources and allocate them to achieve this objective? And of course, taking into account how the opponent will react and respond. But you can they made a point. You don't see any of this coming out of Europe. It's just normative talk about what they think is fair, and there's narratives about how we are the force of light, they're the forces of darkness, and if we don't do anything, they will march on Berlin. So they kind of lock themselves into these narratives, and they don't have any strategy at all. So if you can't win, what the hell are you doing? And I think that was his main point. But I try to get answers from this as well. What exactly do we think we're going to achieve here? And usually you get some way of justifying it. You inflate the Russian casualty numbers. You invent another disease for President Putin. And, if we just one
there any
more
left?
day, it will fall apart.
Are there any diseases he hasn't suffered through yet?
I think he's, yes, survived most diseases now, apparently. It's, yeah.
He's truly the indestructible man, because he's. I love reading the British press headlines. It's a gem every day.
But it goes so far, though. I mean, only the last week I seen an article that the Russians suffering so much with lack of food that they started eating each other,
Yeah,
and it's just. But at the same time, we're ready to march on Poland. Just
well, we ran out of people to eat. We got to eat the Poles next. Come on.
it's kind of wild, but
the breadbasket of the world, by the way, is now having to eat each other.
Yeah. I would say the British propaganda isn't what it used to be. They used to do it quite well. Less so.
They used to, you're right, but it's much more funnier now,
Yeah,
much more entertaining.